Good morning. Good morning. I'm sorry. Let me try that again. Hi, everybody. Whatever it was that drew you to come today, thanks for listening to it, because it helps us all to worship together differently, because this particular set of folks are gathered in the room. And whether you know it or not, you've come on a big, big day. Today is the beginning of a big, big season for the church. The season is called Advent. The word Advent, as you heard earlier, means to wait or to prepare. Well, from the church's perspective, by that I mean the capital C, big church, not just this little church, but church all over the world for all time. From the church's perspective, the holidays that we celebrate in the church are so big that we spend whole seasons preparing for them. It's not just one day that comes and goes. And it's not really like so much getting ready for food or even for family or for fanfare. The point of the holiday is to open ourselves up deliberately to the ever-repeating story of whatever the particular holiday is. So when we say it's the Advent season, and when we say that we're waiting and preparing again for the birth of Jesus on Christmas, what that means is that we're choosing to participate in this year's version of the story, whatever that is. But it's a story that's been happening for more than 2,000 years. So just like the people who waited originally for their Savior to come into the world in human form, during this season, we're also waiting for Jesus to come to our lives in ways that we can see and hear and even touch. Well, I wanted to let you know that next Sunday in Edges, we're going to have a special guest. So a little backstory. This past summer, our church, our larger church, Blacksburg United Methodist Church, got a new lead pastor and a new associate. And the new lead pastor's name is Ralph Rowley. Some of you met him. He came here once and did a little announcement and interview because he was so happy to meet you. Well, just on a personal note, I want to tell you that almost immediately when Ralph got here, I found a real synergy with him as a colleague. We've discovered that we have much to learn from one another as colleagues who have really served in very different environments over the years of our ministries. And I have been talking with Ralph about you ad nauseum. So if he seems a little sick of hearing about you when he meets you, it's my fault. So a couple of months ago, Ralph and Jennifer and I decided it might be time to meet the family, to go to each other's environments. And we began working our schedules to that end. So next Sunday, Ralph will be with you, and I will be preaching in Blacksburg United Methodist Church's traditional worship that meets in church at Church Street. But I can't wait for him to meet you and to see for himself all the kinds of specific things that God is doing here. And I trust that you will pray for me as I put on a robe and try my best to be formal. Because I want to have the opportunity to learn up close what God is doing on our Church Street campus as well. And then hopefully we'll be able to share those stories and we'll all be bigger and better for it. So let me know how it goes. And be really great to our friend Ralph when he comes next week. Now back to the story of the season, Advent, where we wait for Jesus to come again this year. I don't know if you heard what I just said, probably not because it's so rote by now. I said we're waiting for Jesus to come. So when you think of it that way, there's a real implied difficulty. If you're waiting for someone to come, there's the assumption that they're not yet on the scene, right? At least not in ways that you can recognize or feel. Now, I don't know if any of us have ever felt that way with Jesus. I don't know if you've ever wondered where in the world God is when you look at your life. If you've ever watched all that's happening around us and wondered if our world is screwed up beyond repair. I don't know for sure whether pieces of your world have ever seemed really, really dark, like the kind of dark that it looks like no light is coming to. I don't know whether any of us have felt scared or lonely or confused or out of control for whole seasons on the calendar. But if you haven't known any of these, then it's possible it might be hard for you to find your place in the story of Advent. Conversely, if you have known them, then Advent is for you. Maybe you don't see a single thing that you wish Jesus would come to help save. So I think the first question is, do we even need Advent? Do we need to wait on Jesus to come help with anything? So maybe I would first start by asking us, well, where are we stuck? Where are we waiting this year? Where in your life or where in the world are you camped out? Where are you wringing your hands? Where are you waiting for God to show up and do something? So you could answer the question personally inside your own personal story, or you could answer it on a global scale, where in the world? Either way, probably better if we try to strike out for some of these questions together and in groups. So sometimes at Edges we talk in groups of folks. Today it's a harder question. Maybe you get in groups of 5 or 6 folks. Last week we encouraged some people to move around, and they did, like went to new groups. So well, we won't force you, but if you want to do that today, feel free to get up and move to a whole different section of the room and meet some new folks. And just see if you can tease out this question for about 3 minutes. Where in your life or where in the world might we be waiting for God to show up and do something? Okay. Also, a bunch of folks are new in the room today. It's totally fine whether you're new or old if you just want to listen. Just let folks know your name and then say, hey, I'm just here to listen today, and that's fine. Ready? Go. Okay, you've still got 1 minute, just letting you know. All right, about 15 seconds. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. You already look just in that moment like people who are trying to open yourselves up. So already I think that means God has something to do with us in this community. The question was, where are we stuck? What are we waiting for this year? Where in your life or where in the world are we wringing our hands? Are we waiting for God to show up and do something? It's kind of a personal question, but we practiced it in the first worship environment this morning, and it seemed like God could use it, so we'll try it again. In a little thimble snippet, what are some of the things that you heard your group say? Where are we waiting for God to show up and do something? In 2017, inside this room, where are we waiting? In relationships. Yeah. In our jobs. In politics. In parenting. In our personal lives. A lot of the waiting happens just inside ourselves, doesn't it? Oh, life after school. I missed the first word before transitions. Life transitions, yeah. Big changes are places where people are just camped out. It'd be awful to ask a question about waiting and then not wait. So I'll wait for one more. Oh, and ministry opportunities, sure. Okay. Almost every place worth having is a place in which we are or have been or will be waiting. We did that little exercise because it can be hard to remember that the season of Advent, not just today, that really is a question for the whole season of Advent. Maybe we could take it with us and try to be aware of where are the places that we really are waiting that would be different if God came to them. But it can be hard to remember that all 22 days are for the kinds of things that we've just discussed, for God to really come and make a real difference in relationships, in politics, in life transitions. I think it's because we've suffered from years of faulty advertising. And thanks to years of that, it would be easy to think that Christmas Jesus comes to peaceful moonlight moments and quiet children and perfect families and anybody who has enough money to buy the top 10 list from Hammaker Slammer this year. But that wasn't the world that Jesus was born into. The world Jesus was born into 2,000 years ago was much closer to some of the actual realities you've just discussed than it is to the marketing campaigns that have watered him down. And our job in the church is to reclaim the real story. See, Advent is for people who need rescuing when the world doesn't make sense. It's for those of us who are waiting on someone to come and do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. It's for the ones of us who want to believe God is true and who are mostly following all the rules, but who have a hollow sense sometimes that we are going through the motions of our faith. Advent is for the ones in this room who have every reason, every good reason to stand in the shower or drive in the rain or pull the covers back up over our heads and shout or cry or whisper in the direction of God. Where are you? We are waiting on you because we need your help. God sent Jesus in human form not for a Starry Night photo op, but because the world was filled with confusion and tension and conflict. Sound familiar? In the original story, there was plenty of corruption everywhere. For starters, there was an unjust, power-hungry leader. And as always is the case where power is misused, many people were oppressed. Societal inequities were the norm. And much of the world lived in darkness with no real hope. People needed the kind of help they had no idea how to produce. That world and this one seem like close cousins then, don't they? So perhaps it would help us to believe Jesus is coming in this world if we could see how Jesus made a way into that world and what difference it made then. I mean, the easy answer about how Jesus made a way was that he made a way the same way anybody else does, through some pregnant woman. He came into a world and into a family that seemed kind of unremarkable. But that's a pretty simple plot for the God of the universe, isn't it? So in a real effort to not settle for only the children's version of the story, the church says we need a whole season in which we can explore how God makes it into the world and to wonder whether God might come through people like you and like me. This Advent, we're going to focus on one character, the character called Joseph. And Joseph might seem like an unlikely spotlight character because Joseph seems to play a pretty supportive role or supporting role. But then from that place, he gets swept into this story that shapes the rest of his life. Disclaimer, Joseph is my favorite character in the whole Christmas story. I think it's because I get Joseph the most. Most of the times I found myself where it feels like I'm right with God, I got swept up into it. I wasn't planning for it. And Joseph really does seem to have a minor-ish role, which is the role I'm most comfortable or often playing. If anything, the most Joseph would get credit for is for being the best supporting actor. Truthfully, we know almost nothing about him as a person. The passage where we get the most detail about Joseph comes from Matthew's Gospel. And in truth, if we put all the verses in the whole Bible together that tell us something about Joseph, there are 16. So it'll be an act of holy imagination this Advent. So I'd like to start with those verses from Matthew's Gospel this morning and see where we find ourselves. The verses come from Matthew, the 1st chapter, beginning in the 18th verse. And here's the story. This is how the birth of Jesus Christ took place. When Mary, his mother, was engaged to Joseph, before they were married, she became pregnant by the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man. And because he didn't want to humiliate her, he decided to call off their engagement quietly. As he was thinking about this, an angel from the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because the child she carries was conceived by the Holy Spirit." As if that makes anything better. "She will give birth to a son, and you will call him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Now all of this took place so that what the Lord had spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled. And it was this: "Look, a virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel." Emmanuel means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did just as an angel from God commanded, and he took Mary as his wife. But he didn't have sexual relations with her until she gave birth to a son, and Joseph called him Jesus. Now, there's probably all kinds of background that we need to really understand what we've just read. Let's start with this. In the ancient world, the word for engagement was the word betrothal. If you found that the young girl to whom you were betrothed was already with child, the rules in the ancient world were not soft. Legally, you were already considered to be bound to each other, and unbinding was not easy. The Hebrew Scriptures, which Joseph knew and followed, declared that death was the appropriate punishment for infidelity, which would have been Mary's public, at least, story, right? However, by the time of Jesus, it did appear that some religious requirements surrounding infidelity may have softened. The punishment of death had been replaced by a formal renunciation of the woman. It was a ritual meant to shame her and her whole family, which would make her like a dead woman walking, right? Not physically dead, but symbolically so, for the rest of her living. So the rules were explicit about young girls soon to be married who turned up with child. And Joseph is a guy who plays by the rules. Today's scripture tells us only one thing about Joseph's personality. He is a righteous man. Put another way, he is a just, a fair man. So the legal thing, or the righteous thing for a righteous guy like Joseph to do, was to renounce his fiancée in public. And the biblical account is clear. Joseph is a guy who colors inside the lines, who follows the rules, who was committed to his faith and following the laws from the scriptures that he followed. Joseph is a righteous man. But curiously, when Joseph meets an unexpected life circumstance, his fiancée is pregnant and it's not his baby. Now, this is something he does not see coming. This is something for which he has no mental models. And he does something that is truly astounding, especially for him. Joseph thinks outside the lines. Instead of falling back on every should he's ever known or seen, Joseph acts outside the system of sterilized rules. Joseph's motivation comes from some different place, and it is in a place of self-protection, because his decision to divorce Mary quietly won't keep him safe. He's not self-protecting. It puts Joseph at risk in many ways: resources, reputation, future. What makes a guy do that? Have any of you ever done that? Maybe not the specific situation, but thinking outside the lines, acting outside your sense of should. Perhaps it was Joseph's love for a particular person. Maybe he did already love Mary. Maybe that's what allowed him to operate outside his own rules. Or perhaps his sense of justice was so strong, or his own compass for what real righteousness was. Maybe those overrode the status quo for him. But something inside Joseph allowed him to defy the norm, and so he resolved to step aside quietly in order to leave Mary and Mary's family with their dignity intact. Legally, Joseph could have outed Mary and saved himself. And somehow, Joseph doesn't look around for benchmarking from other couples in the same situation. Joseph follows the pull of something else. There are at least two things I wonder if we could wonder about at this point in the story. First, Have you ever experienced God calling you outside the lines? Have you ever sensed that you should reconsider what you've always thought? Have you ever sensed you could reconsider what are some of your permanent belief structures? Have you ever wondered if God was inviting you to change your course? Then maybe Joseph's story is for you. And second, have you ever gotten swept up into a story that might be totally different if you didn't participate in it? Have you ever been in the position to take on a selfless supporting role, the kind that would put someone else at the center? Have you ever sensed God wanted to help you with a story that would cost you in terms of reputation or resources? Could you ever, because some human needs justice in the form of your advocacy, could you ever let God change your beliefs or your assumptions so that you could participate? Then maybe Joseph's story is for you. This second piece I just talked about, the business of being a best supporting actor, of not taking the lead role. This seems like a really hard question of the day. I'm just not sure how many models we have for true sacrifice at real cost to ourselves. So I want to offer you an example from the world we're living in right now. It's not a perfect person. It's probably not a perfect story. It's a snapshot example of what this might look like acted out. Did any of you see the story about Eli Manning this past week? Instead, you should just be thinking to yourself, she's about to use a football example. Well, I'm about to use it because I found this story to be a remarkable mirror to Joseph. So as some of you may know, Eli Manning, has been the Giants' starting quarterback since 2004. This means he has a streak of 210 regular season starts. And it's the second longest streak in NFL history. But according to the Inc. magazine article I read this week, the Giants, who are having one of their worst seasons ever, which some of you may know, they have a 2-9 record currently, they recently announced that they wanted to give more playing time to Manning's younger backups, Geno Smith and Davis Webb. But to keep Manning's game-started streak alive, Giants coach Ben McAdoo offered Eli the chance to continue playing the first half of every game and then to be taken out and replaced with the other quarterbacks. Now, if you live in Eli Manning's world, what would be the normative response for that? What would the rules of the game say Eli Manning should do? Here I'd like to offer you what he actually said. Coach McAdoo told me I could continue to start while Geno and Davis are given an opportunity to play. My feeling is that if you're going to play the other guys, play them. Starting just to keep the streak going and knowing you won't finish the game and have a chance to win it is pointless to me, and it tarnishes the streak. Listen to this. Like I always have, I will be ready to play if and when I am needed. But here it is. I will help Geno and Davis prepare to play as well as they possibly can. The difference between having a right to something and knowing how to do what's right. The righteousness of Joseph. It's that song that we sing and pray here. Let our souls behold humility. So 2 real questions from Joseph for the first week of Advent. Number 1, in Advent, can we let God change our beliefs or our previously held assumptions? If not, then we may be stuck who we always are. Number 2, can we let God reduce our position, our rank, our definition of importance? And I use the word reduce there not because that's what's actually happening, but it's often our perception of what's happening. Why? Why would we do that? Maybe that's how we get swept up into a story that has God at the center of it. I think Joseph felt an insistent longing for a world that operates by different rules, rules that invite reckless compassion and unbridled selflessness, rules that won't generate answers but questions, rules that favor dependence instead of independence, dependence on God's intervention for any of it to make any sense. That's what giving our lives to those questions would do. Well, I think those are the rules of Advent. Just like Joseph's story, I believe Advent can teach us to act in ways that depend on Jesus' coming. But that could be scary. Joseph might have been completely willing to enter into a story that was mostly illogical. Joseph, maybe he wasn't afraid to embrace a life that he wasn't sure he could sustain. Maybe his uncertainties or his skepticism weren't playing so loudly that he let them hold him hostage. I guess it's possible Joseph didn't have any mental difficulties with shifting his beliefs or his position. But I don't think so. I think he was just like me. I think all those things were difficulties. I think he was terrified and yet he still acted. I think instead of letting those emotions stop him, he let them lead the way to faithful action. So I think in this season we should follow Joseph's lead. We should let our doubt and our fear and our half-witted belief lead the way to our faith. And it will take our deliberate actions as well. This morning we'll begin our Advent candle lighting progression that will continue throughout the season. Many churches all over the world do this together. It's supposed to be a physical representation of the growing of Christ among us. So I'll light the first candle this morning and place it with the others. You may notice over by the prayer rail that we've already lit the Christ candle because, of course, it is true that Christ is coming and is also already here. You're invited this morning if you want to or if you need to come to the prayer rail and light a smaller candle. If you do that today, let it represent every place inside of you where opening a door to a new belief, a new position, a new placement would depend on the intervention from God, would depend on the light that only Christ can offer. Amen.